It is yours.
Thank you. Change the language to London because you don't want to hear my Finnish, that's for certain. So I was asked to collaborate from the university side in the training room. I am the senior researcher in physiotherapy at the university, but I've also been working clinically for 15 years in Finland, 18 years in total. And the idea was to think about how we take the training room forward. Now, as you know, Finland is the centre of the world, and Jyväskylä is the centre of Finland. And what we have in Keyhall and in the training room is a system where we can try things new. You know, not just doing the same old thing. Because if you do the same thing, you get the same results. So we need to think about how we can reinvent what we do. And one of our areas that we wanted to do was injury prevention, sickness prevention. And we thought about how can we do this. Now, because there's no model in Finland for this kind of system, there's stuff in Norway, there's stuff in the UK, there's stuff in different countries, Australia, very much ahead of everybody in that respect as well. And we first of all started thinking, should we do it the safe way? Should we just do a little questionnaire and do it simple? The problem with safe is that it might work, but is it optimal? So we've decided as well with the training room that we're going to do stuff that's a little bit out there. We're going to try new things. And if we fail, we learn from it and we develop something new. So while everything we want to say we're going to succeed in everything we do, that's not necessarily always going to be the case. But we decided that the first question we want is injury prevention, sickness prevention. And this is the old slide that we all need to know about when we do injury prevention, whether it's in a micro setting or whether it's in an international setting, is we need to first establish what type of problems you have. You then need to discuss and discover what kind of things cause these injuries, what are the risk factors, produce some kind of preventative measure, and then assess its effectiveness. So basically, if you think about the training room kind of is already in this stage here. We actually started a prevention system. So we've kind of had to go on a little bit backwards as well in the system, is find out what kind of problems we have. Because in injury prevention, and I've been guilty of this when I've been working with teams, is that I've taken the first piece of evidence, I've gone, neuromuscular training, the marvellous work by Kati Passanen and colleagues from UKK institutes, put them into action. And the problem is that you become kind of like focused on loads of different aspects. The research that has been published and the ideas of what is kind of like the prevalence of injuries. Will the same injuries in Europe be the same as TPS? Will the same injuries in YIIK be the same as Manchester United? Can we combine those data? Can we learn from that data and put an intervention in Jyväskylä that is accurate? And ultimately, I would say no, we cannot. But what we have got a little bit is this kind of structure at the moment.
If you're not functional training and you're still using machines and bodybuilding exercises, what can be of relevancy? I mean, do you even know how to hold proper knee alignment while twisting your upper body with good core activation? Preventing injuries is one of my favorite benefits of functional training. I like to obsess about injuries that I don't have and then focus on how functional training will help me prevent those injuries that I've never had. Avoiding what was never there is fitness productivity and it's best. I'm all about kettlebell. Kettlebell training makes you better in everything in life, but mostly they only make you better at kettlebell training.
So, my point is that are we always going to focus, if we go too broad, we're focusing on too much useless stuff. We know with our athletes we cannot be wasting time. That's a fact. We cannot be having a physiotherapist come in and say, right, let's do half an hour of plank, or let's do half an hour of this, if there is no relevance to that team. So that's why we decided that we have to start monitoring the injuries, the sickness, the causes. So we looked at how could we do this? Could we do this retrospectively? Could we ask at the end of this year, what kind of injuries did you have? The problem is that what went on last year rarely has any relevance to what goes on the next year. So you're always 1 year behind. Coaching developments occur. Coaches learn from what they've done before. They see what's happened and they change. So what happens last year might not be relevant to the coming year. So we've got hopefully two more years of the training room at least, and it'll grow. And if we're always working on the previous year's data, we're going to be 1 year behind. And we want to be 1 year ahead. So that's the problem with it. So we want to be active. We want to be proactive. We want to be prospectively following up the injuries. So we have one option is when the athlete themselves voluntarily tells somebody they've got a problem. That's not really the most effective way, mainly because a lot of athletes are very scared about giving out data, say, actually, I've got an injury, am I going to lose my place in the team? They might not want to reveal the data. So this is quite, again, slow and inaccurate. And we could be active and we approach them. That also becomes a problem about going up to somebody, you've got a problem. Have you got pain? Maybe we should do something about it. And they start getting into this mentality that they're maybe injured, or, that also has issues to searching out problems that might not actually exist. So what we've got this way that we give them the option to report injuries in a safe and secure way so that we can monitor them. And we can do it weekly, monthly, we can use apps. But it needs to be quick, it needs to require minimum effort, and there's very few systems out there. Now when we got the start of the training room, we had maybe 2 months to prepare something to get this going. So we had the problems of working out what to do. We also had to take into account all these different access problems. So fear of missing out, will the athlete report the injuries? Why do we need to know this information? So also, injury prevention is not just preventing the first injury, it's optimizing the treatment as soon as you have a problem. So we need to be identifying the athletes immediately that have a problem and treat it so it doesn't go 2, 3, 4 weeks down the line. Because I don't know how many people there, you've got your athlete, they're training, they seem to be doing well. 1 week before a competition, I can't swim anymore because my shoulder's hurt. Oh, how long has your shoulder been hurting for? 6 weeks. So we need to be proactive, so we need to get the interventions in quickly. We have a legal issue with collecting and an ethical issue about collecting the injuries. So if somebody tells me that they've got a health issue, I cannot tell anybody. I cannot even tell the coach. There is that legal aspect of a healthcare professional or a researcher and a participant limitation. So in this case, we always have to go through a certain ethical approach, which has its limitations, but there are ways around it. So we took your favourite Scandinavian neighbours model from Oslo, and they've developed the OSTREC-H system. And this system has been shown to be effective. So over a 30-month system, they've managed to reduce overuse injuries and illnesses. They've halved the number of missing training days due to injuries with this method. So we thought this would probably be the best thing we can implement. We can't just develop this ourselves and come up with a new system. It's a SMS-based weekly questionnaire. What it didn't do is it didn't necessarily decrease the acute injuries, because they're not something that we can always control. They're sport-specific, they're player-specific. If you've got ice hockey, acute injuries make up the main types of injuries. They're contact injuries. How do you prevent contact? How do you prevent contact with the puck? These kind of aspects. It's not just about stretching. It's not just about core stability exercises. But it shows to be effective. So what is it? Basically, it's 4 questions Sunday afternoon, 12 o'clock, they get an SMS saying, with these 4 questions. So we translated the English version, validated it here. So this is also, we can now use this for research. Because this is one of the things, we need to be able to publish our results, to show how good we are, to show our failures, to show our successes. And if our central aspect is health and injury prevention, we have to measure this. So we've now got a validated tool that is accepted in science, accepted in also in competitive sport. So it's 4 questions. To start off, they ask about participation, competition, etc. If they've had no problems, they answer number 1 for all 4 questions, and that's their questionnaire over. So it's pretty quick and easy. If they report that they have a problem, that goes to questions on what type of problem. Is it an illness? Is it an injury? Some questions about the symptoms, lost training days, who knows about it? And then if they have another problem, it goes back again. And if there's no problems, questionnaire over. So maximum it takes 5 minutes to complete. But the amount of data we get from this, if people answer it, is quite extensive, and it can give us a lot of information about how can we proactively prevent the problems occurring at that time in that microclimate, which is Jyväskylä. We can add other questions, we can make it sport specific. And now that we've got it working, we can go to say to the ice hockey guys and say, okay, what data do we know? What data is relevant to you to develop it to make it your sport specific to you? Differently with the figure skating, what's specific to them? How can we make it specific? So we only have to keep these questions here, and the rest we can make up. So this is the next stage. This is something that we need work with the coaches, collaborations with the coaches for. And this is kind of like the system. Sunday they get a text message. Hopefully they answer it straight away. We didn't push it so much this year. We wanted to see whether it would work. I extract the data on Monday at 12 o'clock. I then inform the medical team of each team, like physiotherapist that is responsible for that team. You've got these problems. They report it. And then they go and work with the coaches and the player. This is legally and ethically the only way to do it. But this also allows us to get data that maybe, no offences, but some athletes don't want to tell the coach certain personal data, but might be relevant to their medical healthcare. So we have to keep that in mind. But the more we build up stronger bonds, work closer with the coaches, closer with the athletes, we can get this to be very, very effective. And then what I do normally on a Thursday is then I extract all the data again, because some people answer late. And so then I can keep a team by team, athlete by athlete profile of the weekly injuries, workloads. And so you can see throughout the year, over the next 2 years, over the next 3 years, individual athletes' injury profiles. This has taken a year to actually get this system fully working. So this hasn't been such a big part, unfortunately. I hoped it would be, but the data was just so incredibly large. But now it's actually, now I've got it working. So next year, we can do this straight from the beginning. So this is some of the stuff that we did. So we had 7 different sports. We have different age groups. We have different sports. So it was good to see how do they respond? What kind of responses do they get? We've done it for 22 weeks. I processed 22 weeks of data so far. That's 1,600 responses. That's 30 pieces of data. No, 60 pieces of data per response. So you can imagine that there's lots of boxes and lots of Excel tables involved. We had about a 62% response rate. Ideally, obviously, you want 100%. You're never going to get it in real life. But the more you can get responses, the more accurate we can be with our injury prevention systems. So the more we can see it, oh, hang on a minute, there comes one of these peaks in the sickness profs. We've seen those peaks. Let's get some information out to all the teams, how to prevent the sickness, how to stop the spreading of the sickness. Alternatively, if there's a specific sport with a specific type of injury, we see an increase in those kind of injuries, we can do what they did in the basketball, start doing an evidence-based or evidence-informed injury prevention system for the ankles. So this is something that we did. We had, you can see that initially 80 people responded, and as the year got on, it decreased. This is usual. This is usual for this kind of the way we work this year. Next year, I think we need to be a little bit more strict if we can. You know, but then again, the information will be coming more back to the coaches. This is what we wanted to see. We wanted to make sure we have as more healthy athletes as possible. Now, on the first day, this means that they have no problems. This means they've answered question 1, answer 1 on every single one of the 4 questions. But if you think that we have 80 odd so athletes answering, we only had between 40 to 60% of all the athletes in Jyväskylä training at 100%. So 40 to 60% of our athletes at any one time during the last year had something that was affecting their ability to train 100%. That's quite scary, really. But that also gives us something to work on. One thing that we did notice was that, to an extent, some of the lesser injuries got a little bit less, but then obviously the number of people decreased. But the more severe injuries, they kept kind of up and down. This is Christmas, so when it says that everybody went away, there was a decrease in injuries, etc., sicknesses, but then after each break there was a peak. And this is all the sports combined. So what kind of stuff did we see? So this was really interesting, and I really loved going through the data because it was completely against what I had planned. I had in my head like this little idea of what I was going to see. I was wrong. So ice hockey. Acute injuries, predominantly the reasons for lost training day. Only a few stress injuries. And then the reasons we could talk about forever, but illnesses are the same as what all the other sports were. But they had mainly head, shoulder, wrist injuries through contact with a stick, contact with a shoulder, contact with the side of the ice rink. And then the most common location, however, the most severe, was the actual knee injuries. So this gives us some idea about how we could then start thinking about preventing the lost days in ice hockey. They lost in the team, with those that answered over 22 weeks, they lost 10 training days per week due to an injury or an illness. Basketball, they lost in total 391 training days. Acute injuries to the ankle and knee, as previously discussed. That's not a huge surprise, but these are non-contact acute injuries. So we can't treat these or manage these in the same way as we can ice hockey. So we need to come up with tools that we can prevent these and treat them, speed up the early treatment protocols, give the information that they need to minimise the effect on their training. Sickness, more or less the same, or the other as ice hockey. What was interesting, although you notice that knee ankle injuries was your most common injury in basketball, the most common lost days was for knee. 3 times as many training days was lost due to knee injuries. So if you're just looking at prevalence and the number of types of number of an injury, then you might be thinking let's focus on ankle. But this came up and saying actually this lost days in knees. I believe this is one ACL surgery plus other knee injuries, but it gives us the idea that maybe we should start thinking about some other preventions as well as this. This data I got 2 days ago, so this is so fresh that unfortunately I haven't been able to give the feedback even to the physiotherapists. And then we have track and field. Track and field and gymnastics behaved in a very similar way in the types of injuries. They were located around the body, not just in one place. So you have non-contact injuries, changing directions, cutting injuries. You have contact injuries in ice hockey. But then we have all over the body, stress injuries as equally as much as acute injuries. Sickness was the same. Maybe In prevalence, it was about the same. So you then start thinking, well, they've got a completely different injury profile to the other guys. In gymnastics, they had the same kind of number of acute injuries, but then they had only 2 days lost to training due to acute injuries, even though they had a very similar prevalence. This comes down to the idea that maybe people perceive absence from training in a different way. So in terms of absence from training, when they're being coached by the physio, they see that as being away from training. And then they're only fully training when they're back fully under the coach. Whereas maybe in gymnastics, they're training all the time and they're just adapting their training in a different way. So it's quite interesting to see the perception of, is an athlete injured or are they uninjured? And this has just come up in the last couple of days, and something that it'd be great to just think about, and how we approach an injured athlete. Because when we go to return to play, they've got to feel like they're ready. And if they don't feel like they are an athlete, they feel like they are a patient, then we've got a transition issue between injured and healthy. So this is again maybe more like sports literacy for the athletes. We need to teach them about it, educate them, and this is something maybe that we have to address for the next phase. Figure skating, as well as skiing, swimming, were more stress-related injuries, very few acute injuries. Locations is what you would expect. But they only had maybe 3 lost days, very few acute injuries, but a lot of stress injuries. So again, their profile is different. So this is the issue we have, and this is something we're going to address, is that we cannot have one size fits all in injury prevention, especially stress and acute injuries. So each team, we're going to have to go away, think about the most optimal way. Now, I don't want to live on last year's data either. So when we do the injury monitoring and symptom monitoring next year, we're going to work and be able to be more proactive on it, respond very early to what's common injuries, common sicknesses, and try and get it better. But again, we need to sit down with you guys, the coaches, etc., to work out how's the best way to implement this. We know it works, we know it's got relevance. How do we take this forwards? One thing that colleague Salah will talk about is sicknesses. It was the same throughout the teams. So obviously we have fluctuations, summer flus, winter flus, stomach bugs going around. And she's going to talk about this, so I don't need to go on this very much. But what you will see is that as there was peaks in sicknesses, there was peaks in lost training days. And if we go by what we said from the Ostrek, from the previous research, these are stuff that we can do something about. Very simple ways of preventing these lost days. And I won't spoil her thunder, so I'll leave her to talk about that. And then what we're going to do in the future? Well, now we've got a system that we can give more feedback, individualized feedback. So for each athlete, we'll be creating a profile of lost training days due to injury, sickness, stress injuries. We'll integrate these into actions. Even though it was nice game today, nice research, it's very valid for me, but also we need to get this into much more active, proactive system. Work with you guys, the coaches, and then try to get this automated feedback so we know what's going on, we sit down, discuss, and I'll be working with my colleagues in the university through the physiotherapists and through the doctors. So that's why you probably haven't seen me at all or know about me, because I've been hiding in the background, keeping my head down with the coffee machine in my room. So I'd like to thank those coaches and those athletes that participated this year in the follow-up with the work that we did, tolerated to an extent the slightly broken communications at times. And hopefully next year we build on this and we can show the validation of the training room, and we can find new and novel methods to give you guys, the coaches, the the materials, i.e. healthy athletes to train to make into the future stars of Finland. Thank you.
You said that you had this data for just a few days, and realization that different sports perceive their injured players as, or injured days are different between the teams. Who do you see is right at the moment, in sense that of those days lost, who could recover?
So it's a good question, because we're having this debate just this lunchtime, and if you think about return to play, somebody picks up an injury and they want to get back to their sport as soon as possible. There are physical and psychological things that limit the return to play and full return to play. What we need to try to be doing is preventing the secondary injury or the re-injury, because that is, the first injury is the biggest risk factor for a second injury. So whether it's biomechanical aspects, physical aspects, or psychological aspects that have prevented the return to play fully and expose them to a second injury is still questionable. But I would like to personally think that an athlete doesn't feel like they're under rehab. And if you think about the training loads that Akka was talking about, that we don't want to be reducing the training loads, we want to be modifying them and using the training as a way of enhancing healing as well as maintaining the fitness for the sport. So I'd like to think they don't feel themselves as being injured. But it's partly the literacy, and it's partly how I ask the questions. So some groups perceived it as, okay, I'm still training, I'm still going up to training, so I'm not injured. Some didn't. So I would like them to feel that they're not injured. I'd like to feel that they're part of the team, that they're training fully, and then when they're ready to go back, they just flow back into the team.
So it would be best to see that our athletes would perceive that they are not injured as long as they think they would.
I think there's a huge psychological aspect. There are very many times when I was working clinically and a doctor would say to an athlete, a high level athlete, you've got 6 weeks holiday after an injury. Or, because they think about the healing process of the bone or the healing process of the tendon. But every single injury from day one should be loaded in a unique way. It's called optimal loading. They shouldn't be resting unless there's a real reason to rest them. So what we do know is, like with muscle injuries, you tear a muscle, if you can move within a certain level of pain, you move. And that actually speeds up the return to play. So that idea and that concept that you have to be pain-free and that you have to be healthy to be part of the team or be training needs to be addressed in those athletes that have that perception. And in the training, when we have that luxury of being able to work during warm-ups in the training, while they're in the physical place, while the physiotherapists are working with them, to include them and build them into the training structure.